Hey everybody, and welcome back to the beginning of a new season of the Unofficial WCC Hoops podcast. I know it's been about a month and a half, maybe 2 months. I've started to lose track over the course of this summer of days, but we are going to get back into the groove of things as we get ready for another West Coast Conference basketball season, another college basketball season. We are under 100 days left before the start of the new season. Obviously, campuses are going to start having students return in the next few weeks if they haven't already done so already, as some teams this week are actually on international trips, St. Mary's and LMU being a couple of them. This week, I believe LMU is over in Italy, and then St. Mary's is making their tour through Australia in this week. So we're going to get into a number of things. We're going to get into the St. Mary's schedule, which was released just a few days ago, and it's really impressive. I'm excited to for this season to kind of get going for them and see what this team is going to look like. And then we also are going to talk a little bit about the realignment rumors that are out there and everything else that's kind of like shifting around. How does the Pac-12 impact the WCC? How do some of these other moving parts? How is Gonzaga involved? Because obviously there's also some rumors about the Big East and whatnot, and we'll get into that as well. The WCC schedule also came out this past week. We'll touch on it a little bit, but I'm probably going to save that for another full episode just so we can dive into what are some of like the trends, what's kind of like the going to be the tough streaks for teams, the easy streaks, like what do we think that's going to look like as we get a little closer to January and February. And then also we're going to have a special guest, Tuck Clarry from the New Bloods podcast is going to come on, and we'll talk to him about where kind of a little bit more about that realignment. And then also Gonzaga and probably some of this more recent news about the Kentucky Gonzaga game and this the almost admission of Coach John Calipari saying he didn't want to play in the kennel. So we'll kind of get into that too. But before we get into all of that, I would be remiss if I did not address and acknowledge the very large passings of late. And I'll start with the one that impacts really all of college basketball, all of the basketball world, and that was Bill Russell, who passed away last weekend at the age of 88. As anyone who has watched basketball or knows anything about basketball knows, he was the greatest champion the sport has ever seen, an 11-time NBA champion, 2-time NCAA champion, the greatest player that USF right here in the WCC has ever seen, arguably the greatest Celtic that there ever was, along with Larry Bird. He was the first African-American head coach in the NBA, really in any professional sport. He was a civil rights activist and ambassador. He was awarded the Presidential Medal of Honor by President Obama, and a Bay Area native from McClymonds High School to USF. He has been an inspiration to so many across the sport, across this country, and there's no quantifying or qualifying just the impact that he has had on the entire basketball world and this country in general. And then in the WCC, even more recently, the conference had introduced the Bill Russell rule, which is again another step toward equity and equality for others. And I'll read the quote from the conference of what that rule kind of entailed for those who need a little bit of a reminder. The Russell Rule requires each member institution to include a member of a traditionally underrepresented community in the pool of final candidates for every athletic director, senior administrator, head coach, full-time assistant coach position in the athletic department. And this goes so much more to representation and for other groups to have opportunities to be able to see themselves in these roles. And I can't tell you that even for myself, like this has also been a thing of like, even just we talk about like, especially over the last few years, there's been more emphasis on just the like more representation even in other forms of media and whatnot. And that was a big thing for me growing up as well, just seeing myself in specific areas as me being a person of color and as someone who is biracial, and being able to see myself in specific areas and seeing that it was possible to reach those heights. And as I kind of talk about representation and why that matters, another icon of and especially the areas that I actually really kind of I was drawn to as I was younger. Nichelle Nichols, Lieutenant Uhura on Star Trek, Commander Uhura, as she later became throughout the course of the franchise, passed away the same day as Bill Russell. Uh, Again, she was an icon of that franchise, and for anyone who is a Trekkie over at any point, she was such an integral part and such an integral piece to what Star Trek represented and what Star Trek was, what their goals were to show that people from every walk of life will be able to reach the stars someday. The just kind of like thinking about even just some of the stories that you would hear about, one of the ones that kind of how important she was to these the civil rights movement even back in the 60s when Star Trek first came out. I remember the one story that she was thinking about leaving the show, and she was, and when during the course of that thought process, she was approached by Martin Luther King, who impressed upon her the importance of her place on that show and on American television, and why it meant so much for so many. And that is true. It's and I've been reading so many stories on the internet, on social media the last week or so, and just how many people were inspired by seeing her in those roles and seeing her be a person of influence and a person in leadership on Star Trek, in the movies and on the TV show. And it was also something that she worked toward actively in her personal life as well. She worked with NASA for over 30 years, recruiting women and people of color to join the agency, and we've seen and her impact is shown there. So again, like two, just in my mind, just titans of representation and kind of moving us forward as a country, to show that people of color and women and be in these positions of influence and leadership, and that so many can do more than maybe what is like placed right in front of our faces. And then the third, if you were a baseball fan, really a sports fan, if you ever thought about going into broadcasting, Vin Scully passing away this past week as well. And they kind of always say that it comes in threes, and it sure did this week. And if you were a baseball fan, if you were thinking about going into broadcasting at any one point, Vin Scully was someone you listened to. Vin Scully was someone you aspired to be. He was the voice of a sport, and he could paint a picture like no other using just his words. He started in the sport just as television was becoming a regular thing in people's homes. He came from a generation where baseball was king, and where there was so much romanticism to the game, and you could feel that through the way he broadcasted games. And I grew up a Giants fan, and of course Vin Scully was the voice of the Dodgers for 67 years, and that didn't matter, because when you heard his voice, you just felt comfortable. You felt at ease. You knew you were going, like, it was as enjoyable of an experience regardless of who you rooted for, because Vin Scully could tell a story. He could paint a picture, again, like very few ever could. He was the standard bearer. He was the ultimate professional. it was never about him. It was always about the game, about the players, about the fans. It was about how people experienced the game. And he was a part of that, and a huge part of that. For those who grew up in the Bay, for those who did grow up in the Bay Area and even weren't necessarily baseball fans, like if you were a 49er fan, he was the voice of the catch. That was Vin Scully. He meant so much to so many, and even again, seeing so many people talk about their experiences, even if it's not a direct experience with any of these people, how much impact that Bill Russell, Vin Scully, Nichelle Nichols all had on so many. And just wanted to take a few moments and just kind of talk about those three, because there's no understating just how the importance of each one of them in American culture.